The village square smelled of smoke and hatred, and the orc woman kneeling in the dirt had stopped fighting her chains an hour ago, because she knew it would only make them tighten the brand deeper when it finally came. Kerra had been traveling alone through the borderlands when the human militia found her, dragged her from her camp before dawn, and accused her of stealing livestock she had never seen. Now the sun hung high and merciless over the crowd that had gathered to watch her punishment, their faces twisted with the kind of righteousness that came from fear dressed up as justice. The blacksmith pulled the iron from the coals, its tip glowing orange-white, the symbol of a thief ready to be burned into her shoulder for everyone to see for the rest of her life. She lifted her chin and met the blacksmith's eyes, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg. Her green skin was dusty from the road, her dark hair matted with sweat, but her tusks caught the sunlight as she bared them in defiance rather than submission. The militia captain read charges from a scroll that might as well have been blank for all the truth it contained, and the crowd murmured approval like a single beast with many throats. The blacksmith raised the iron, swinging it toward her bare shoulder where they had torn her shirt away, and Kerra breathed in deep to prepare for the searing agony that would mark her forever. The iron never touched her skin. A hand shot out from the edge of the crowd and caught the metal rod mid-swing, fingers closing around the glowing brand without hesitation or protection. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, but the hand did not let go, and the blacksmith stumbled backward as his tool was wrenched from his grip by a man who stepped between the kneeling orc and her would-be punishers. He was tall enough that the crowd seemed to shrink around him, broad through the shoulders in a way that spoke of years carrying weight through mountain passes. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, his beard thick and untamed, his clothes the practical leather and wool of someone who lived far from towns and their rules. He held the branding iron in his right hand, smoke rising from his palm where the metal had seared his flesh, and his expression carried the kind of quiet fury that made armed men take involuntary steps backward. "That is enough," he said, and his voice rolled across the square like distant thunder. The militia captain recovered first, his hand dropping to his sword. "This is none of your concern, stranger. The orc has been tried and sentenced." "Tried by whom?" The stranger's eyes were the gray of winter storms, and they swept across the crowd with open contempt. "I see no magistrate. I see no evidence. I see a mob and a woman in chains." "She is not a woman, she is an orc," someone shouted from the safety of the crowd's center. The stranger finally dropped the branding iron, letting it fall to the dirt where it smoldered against dry earth. His right hand was raw and blistered, the skin blackened in the shape of the iron's shaft, but he did not acknowledge the injury. "She breathes and bleeds like anyone here. That makes her deserving of justice, not whatever this is." Kerra stared up at him, unable to process what was happening. Humans did not defend orcs. Humans did not burn their own hands to stop orc punishment. Humans certainly did not stand alone against armed militias for the sake of someone they had never met. Yet here this man stood, and the set of his shoulders suggested he would not be moving. "You defend a thief and a savage," the captain said, drawing his sword now. 3 of his men did the same, metal singing as it cleared scabbards. "That makes you complicit in her crimes." "What crimes?" The stranger's voice remained level, but something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "Tell me the evidence you have against her. Tell me what she stole and from whom." The captain's jaw worked, and silence stretched across the square. Finally, a farmer pushed forward, pointing at Kerra with a trembling hand. "My sheep. 3 of them gone in the night, and her camp was only 2 miles from my property." "Did you see her take them?" the stranger asked. "Well, no, but Did you find the sheep in her possession? No, but everyone knows orcs are thieves and killers. The stranger turned to look at Kerra for the first time. Really look at her. And she saw him take in her empty hands, her lack of weapons, the traveling pack they had dumped in the dirt that contained nothing but bedroll and provisions and a small carved figure of a bird that her sister had made years ago. His gaze lingered on her face, and she wondered what he saw there: fear, pride, exhaustion, all three at once perhaps. "There is your evidence," he said quietly, turning back to the crowd. "Assumptions and hatred. If that is enough to brand someone for life in this village, then I want no part of it." He knelt beside Kerra and examined the chains binding her wrists and ankles. They were crude iron, locked with a simple mechanism that he studied for only a moment before pulling a knife from his belt. The crowd stirred uneasily, hands reaching for weapons, but he ignored them and worked the blade into the lock's workings with practiced efficiency. Within seconds, the wrist chains fell away. The ankle shackles took only slightly longer. "Can you walk?" he asked her, and his voice had changed, become softer somehow, meant only for her ears. Kerra nodded slowly, not trusting her voice yet. Her wrists were raw where the iron had bitten into green skin, but she pushed herself to her feet with as much dignity as she could gather. She stood nearly as tall as him, which seemed to surprise no one as much as herself. The stranger rose beside her and reached down to collect her pack, slinging it over his shoulder along with his own. His burned hand moved stiffly, but he still managed to face the militia and the crowd with the calm readiness of someone who had stood against worse odds and survived. "We are leaving," he announced. "Anyone who tries to stop us will regret it." The captain stepped forward, sword still drawn, and two of his men moved to flank him. "You cannot just take a prisoner and walk away. Watch me." Something in the stranger's tone made the captain hesitate. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence, or perhaps it was the way the stranger's hand had drifted to the axe hanging at his belt, a weapon meant for splitting wood, but capable of splitting much more. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring, violence trembling in the air between them. Then an older woman pushed through the crowd, her face lined with years and wisdom both. "Let them go, Marcus. We all know those sheep probably wandered off or got taken by wolves like usual. This has gone far enough." The captain's face reddened. The law requires evidence, not assumptions," the old woman interrupted. "And since when do we answer to you anyway? You are a militia captain, not a judge." Other voices rose in agreement, not all of them, but enough to break the crowd's unity. The captain looked around and seemed to realize his moment had passed, that whatever fever had gripped the village square was cooling in the face of an armed stranger who clearly knew how to use his weapons, and an old woman unafraid to speak truth. "Go," he spat finally. "But if either of you are seen near this village again, there will be consequences." The stranger did not bother responding. He simply turned to Kerra and nodded toward the road leading out of the square, and she followed because there was nothing else to do. No other choice that did not end in fire and pain and permanent marks. They walked through the parting crowd, and Kerra felt dozens of eyes burning into her back, hatred and fear following her like smoke. Only when they reached the edge of the village and the fields opened up before them did she dare to speak. "Why?" The word came out rougher than she intended, her throat dry from hours of silence and terror. He did not look at her, just kept walking with that steady mountain pace that ate distance without seeming to hurry. Because it was wrong. Humans do not usually care about what is wrong when it comes to orcs. Now he did glance at her, and something complicated moved across his face. "This one does." They walked in silence for perhaps a mile, following a wagon road that cut through fields ready for harvest. The sun had begun its slow descent toward evening, painting the grain gold and amber. Kerra's legs trembled with exhaustion and the aftermath of fear, but she forced herself to keep pace with the stranger, unwilling to show weakness even to someone who had just saved her life. Finally, he stopped at a place where a stream crossed under the road through a stone culvert. He set down both packs and knelt by the water, plunging his burned hand into the current. A hiss escaped between his teeth, the first sign of pain he had allowed himself to show. Kerra knelt beside him and looked at the injury in the clear afternoon light. The burn was severe, wrapping around his palm and fingers in an angry pattern that would take weeks to heal properly. Blisters had already formed across the worst of it, and she knew from experience that burns like this often became infected if not tended carefully. "You need medicine," she said. "Salve at minimum, bandages for certain. I will manage. You caught a branding iron with your bare hand because of me. The least I can do is help treat the wound." He pulled his hand from the water and studied it with clinical detachment, as if the damaged flesh belonged to someone else. "You know herb craft, some. My clan's healer taught me before." She trailed off, unwilling to finish that sentence, to explain about the raid that had scattered her people and left her wandering the borderlands alone. He seemed to understand without explanation. "There is a place I know, about 3 miles further up this road, a cabin in the foothills. We can reach it before full dark if we do not delay." "Your cabin?" "Yes." Kerra studied him, this strange human who had appeared from nowhere and upended what should have been the worst day of her life. He had not asked her name or her story, had not demanded gratitude or explanation. He had simply acted when action was needed, and now he offered shelter as casually as he might comment on the weather. "I do not even know what to call you," she said finally. "Landon," he replied. "Landon Quinn." "I am Kerra." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for what you did. I know it cost you." He glanced at his burned hand again and shrugged. "Skin heals. That brand would have marked you forever." They gathered up the packs and continued walking as the sun sank lower, and shadows grew long across the fields. Landon set a steady pace that Kerra could maintain despite her exhaustion, and they moved in a companionable silence that felt strange after hours of hostile eyes and angry voices. The road began to climb into rolling hills covered in oak and pine, and the air cooled as they gained elevation. True to his word, they reached the cabin just as twilight settled over the mountains. It was a solid structure of stone and timber, small but well built, with a garden plot to one side and a shed for storing wood and tools. Smoke curled from the chimney, which surprised Kerra until she saw Landon's expression shift to something wary. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, and his hand moved to the axe at his belt. They approached the door carefully, and Landon pushed it open to reveal a young man sitting by the fire, feeding wood to flames that had clearly been built only minutes before. The man looked up with a grin that transformed into surprise and then sheepish embarrassment when he saw Landon's expression. "Uncle Landon," he said, standing quickly. "I did not expect you back so soon." "Clearly." Landon's tone was dry. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" "Father sent me to check on you. Said you had been gone to town for supplies 3 days ago and should have returned by now." The young man's gaze shifted to Kerra and his eyes widened. "Is that an orc?" "Her name is Kerra, and yes." Landon moved into the cabin and began lighting lamps, his movements efficient despite his injured hand. "Tell your father I am fine and was delayed by business in the village. You can head home now." Thomas stood his ground, though he watched Kerra with the nervous fascination of someone who had heard many stories about orcs but never actually seen one. "Father said I should stay and make sure you have everything you need." "I have everything I need. Go home, Thomas." But now, the word carried finality that even a determined nephew could not ignore. Thomas gathered his things with obvious reluctance, his curiosity about Kerra warring with his desire not to anger his uncle further. At the door, he paused and looked back at Landon with genuine concern. "Your hand," he said, noticing the burn for the first time. "What happened? An accident? I will tend it. Safe travels, Thomas." The young man left, and Kerra heard his horse being led away from behind the cabin, hoofbeats fading down the trail. Landon closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts or perhaps his patience. "Your nephew seems curious," Kerra observed. "Thomas is 16 and thinks the world is simpler than it is." Landon moved to a cupboard and began pulling out supplies: clean cloth, a jar of something that smelled of herbs and beeswax, a kettle for heating water. "He will tell his father I have an orc in my cabin, and my brother will have opinions about that." Opinions. Many of them, none particularly favorable. He set the kettle over the fire and glanced at her. "Are you hungry?" Kerra realized she had not eaten since the previous evening, and her stomach answered before she could speak. Landon's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile, and he pulled bread and cheese and dried meat from a box built into the wall to keep things cool. They ate in silence while the water heated, and Kerra took the opportunity to study her reluctant host. Landon moved around the cabin with the ease of long familiarity, everything in its place, nothing wasted or excessive. The space was clean and organized, with books stacked on a shelf near the fire and tools hung properly on the walls. A man who lived alone but lived deliberately, who had chosen this solitary life for reasons she could only guess at. When the water was hot enough, she took charge of treating his burn despite his protests that he could manage it himself. She cleaned the wound carefully, applied the salve with gentle fingers, and wrapped his hand in clean bandages. The burn was serious but not crippling, and if he kept it clean and rested, it would heal without lasting damage beyond some scars. "You have a healer's touch," he said, watching her work. "I told you I learned some things from my clan. Before." "Before what?" Kerra tied off the bandage and sat back. "Before a human raiding party decided our village was too close to their settlement. Before they burned our homes and killed anyone who resisted. Before I became a wanderer with no home and no people." Landon was quiet for a long moment. "I am sorry that happened to you." "Are you? You are human. That was humans who did this, who scattered my clan and left me alone." "Yes, and it was a human who caught that branding iron today as well." His voice was level, neither defensive nor apologetic. "We are not a single thing, orc or human. Some of us are better than others." Kerra wanted to argue, to pour out all the accumulated bitterness of the past months, all the fear and loneliness and anger. But looking at this man with his burned hand and his quiet cabin in the mountains, a man who had risked himself for a stranger because it was the right thing to do, she found the words catching in her throat. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked instead. "Because I grew tired of villages and towns and all the noise they make." He flexed his bandaged hand carefully, testing the wrapping. "I spent years in the king's army, following orders and fighting wars I did not always understand. When my service ended, I came here and built this place and decided I preferred my own company to most others. Most others. There are a few people I tolerate, my brother and his family mostly, though they think I am strange for choosing this life. Occasionally, someone worth knowing crosses my path." He met her eyes. "You need a place to rest and recover. You can stay here as long as necessary." Kerra blinked. "You are offering me shelter just like that, just like that. You do not know anything about me. I could be dangerous." "So could I." He stood and moved to a chest in the corner, pulling out blankets. The bed is mine, but you can have these and sleep by the fire. It stays warm through the night. Tomorrow we can discuss what comes next, but for now you should sleep. You look exhausted." He was right. Exhaustion had settled into her bones like winter cold. The accumulated weight of too many days sleeping rough and too many hours of terror in that village square. She accepted the blankets and spread them near the hearth, and Landon banked the fire to a level that would burn steady through the dark hours. Before he retreated to his bed in the cabin's far corner, he paused and looked back at her. "You are safe here, Kerra. I give you my word on that." She did not know why she believed him, this stranger who had upended her understanding of what humans could be, but she did. She curled up in the blankets and listened to the fire crackle and the mountain wind whisper around the cabin's solid walls. And for the first time in months, she slept without fear. Morning came with the smell of cooking porridge and weak sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. Kerra woke slowly, confused for a moment about where she was, then remembered everything in a rush: the village, the brand, the burned hand, the mountain man who caught iron mid-swing. She sat up to find Landon already awake and moving around the cabin, stirring a pot over the fire and setting out bowls. "There is a stream about 50 yards behind the cabin," he said when he noticed her awake. "If you want to wash, the water is cold but clean." Kerra took him up on the offer, finding the stream exactly where he described and using the opportunity to scrub away the grime and fear of the previous day. The water was indeed freezing, fed by mountain snow even this late in the year, but it cleared her head and made her feel almost human again. Almost orc again, she corrected herself wryly. When she returned to the cabin, Landon had breakfast waiting porridge with honey and dried berries, simple but satisfying. They ate together at the rough table he had built from local timber, and Kerra found herself watching him between bites, trying to understand this complicated man who had inserted himself into her life so completely. "What will you do now?" he asked finally, setting down his spoon. "Do you have somewhere to go? People looking for you?" Kerra shook her head. "My clan is scattered. Some went north into the deep mountains, some crossed the border into the wild lands. I do not know where any of them ended up, or if they even survived the journey." "And you were traveling south when the militia found you." "I was looking for work, or at least a place where I might be tolerated long enough to earn coin for supplies. I know it was foolish. Orc women traveling alone in human lands rarely find anything but trouble. Yet you tried anyway. The alternative was staying in the wilderness and hoping to survive on hunting and foraging. I am competent enough at both, but winter comes early in these mountains and alone." She trailed off, not wanting to admit how desperate she had become. Landon nodded slowly, his gray eyes thoughtful. "I could use help around here." Kerra stared at him. "What?" "The garden needs harvesting before the first frost. Firewood needs splitting and stacking for winter. The roof on the shed has a leak that requires patching. I can do it all myself, but it would go faster with help, and my hand will be useless for heavy work for at least a week." He gestured at the bandaged palm. "If you wanted to stay and work, I could offer room and board, fair payment for fair labor. You are offering me a job, here. Unless you have somewhere better to be." Kerra's mind raced. She had spent months being driven from place to place, told to move along, threatened and cursed and spat upon for the crime of existing in human spaces. Now this man, this strange mountain hermit, was offering her exactly what she had been seeking: work, shelter, a reason to stop running for a while. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You do not owe me anything. If anything, I owe you for yesterday. Consider the debt paid when the firewood is stacked." He stood and began clearing the breakfast dishes. "I am not doing this out of charity, Kerra. I genuinely need the help, and you genuinely need a place to stay. It works out well for both of us." She wanted to argue, to find the catch or the trap, because in her experience, humans who offered help always wanted something in return. But looking around the simple cabin with its organized efficiency and watching Landon wash dishes with his bandaged hand held awkwardly to keep the wrapping dry, she could not see the angle. He seemed to mean exactly what he said: a simple transaction, labor for shelter. "All right," she said finally. "I will stay and work, but only until winter comes. After that, I move on." "After that is your choice." He dried the bowls and put them away. "For now, we have work to do. Are you any good with a knife?" She raised an eyebrow. "At what? Throwing, fighting, carving?" "Harvesting vegetables." Despite everything, Kerra felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside, the first genuine laugh in months. Landon's expression shifted into something that might have been pleasure at the sound, and he grabbed a basket from beside the door. "Come on," he said. "I will show you the garden, and you can demonstrate your fearsome orc skills at collecting squash." They spent the morning working in the garden plot, and Kerra found a strange peace in the simple labor of cutting vegetables from their vines and sorting them into baskets. The sun was warm on her shoulders, the mountain air clean and sharp in her lungs, and Landon worked beside her with quiet competence, pointing out which plants were ready for harvest and which needed more time. He did not stare at her green skin or her tusks. He did not ask invasive questions about orc culture or treat her like a curiosity to be examined. He simply worked alongside her as he might work alongside any farmhand, offering instruction when needed and otherwise maintaining a comfortable silence. By midday, they had filled 6 baskets with squash, onions, carrots, and potatoes, along with the last of the beans that had survived the cooling nights. They carried everything into the cabin and spent the afternoon sorting it, some for immediate eating, some for storing in the cool box, some for preserving or drying for winter use. "You grow a lot of food for one man," Kerra observed as she helped arrange potatoes in a wooden crate. "I like being self-sufficient. The less I need to go to town for supplies, the better." "You do not like towns much, do you?" "Not particularly." He was cutting squash into strips for drying. "Too many people with too many opinions about how others should live." "I did enough taking orders in the army. Now I prefer to make my own decisions." "Is that why you helped me? Because you hate towns and the people in them?" Landon paused in his work and looked at her directly. "I helped you because what they were doing was wrong. It had nothing to do with my feelings about towns and everything to do with my feelings about justice. Most humans do not think orcs deserve justice. Most humans are idiots." The bluntness of it startled another laugh out of her, and Kerra realized she was starting to like this strange, gruff man who lived alone on a mountain and caught branding irons bare-handed. It was a dangerous thing to like him, she knew. Getting comfortable here, getting attached to this temporary safety, would only make it harder when winter came and she had to move on. But for now, for today, she let herself enjoy the simple pleasure of work and company and not being afraid. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Kerra rose with the sun and helped Landon with the endless tasks of preparing for winter, splitting firewood, patching the shed roof, smoking meat from deer. Landon hunted in the surrounding forest, gathering the last herbs from the mountainside before frost killed them. Her body remembered the hard work of clan life, and her hands grew calloused again from axe handles and hammer grips. Landon's burn healed slowly but cleanly under her care. She changed his bandages each evening and checked for signs of infection, and he bore her ministrations with patient tolerance even when she knew the cleaning must hurt. His hand would carry scars, but the fingers retained their full range of motion, and after a week, he could grip tools again with only minor discomfort. They talked while they worked, sharing stories in small pieces. Kerra told him about her clan's customs, about the songs they sang during harvest, and the way they celebrated the turning seasons. Landon told her about the army, about campaigns in distant lands and the friends he had lost along the way. Neither of them spoke about the deeper hurts. He did not press her about the raid that destroyed her village, and she did not ask why a veteran soldier would choose total isolation over any form of community. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and read from Landon's small collection of books, or he would carve while she worked on repairing her traveling clothes with needle and thread he provided. Sometimes they played strategy games with a board and carved pieces he had made, and Kerra learned that Landon was fiercely competitive despite his quiet demeanor. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence and watched the flames dance. It was peaceful in a way Kerra had not experienced since before the raid, and dangerous for precisely that reason. She was getting comfortable. She was letting her guard down. She was starting to think of the cabin as home and Landon as something more than a temporary employer. 3 weeks into her stay, Thomas returned. Kerra was behind the cabin splitting firewood when she heard the horse approaching, and by the time she came around to the front, Landon was already standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and an expression of mild irritation on his face. "You again," he said to his nephew. "Does your father have you checking on me every week now?" Thomas dismounted with the awkward enthusiasm of youth and grinned. "He worries. You know how he is. Besides, I wanted to see if the orc was still here." "She has a name," Landon said mildly. "And yes, Kerra is still here. She is helping with winter preparations." Thomas's gaze found Kerra, and she saw open curiosity in his young face, along with a trace of nervousness that he was trying hard to hide. He was at that age where bravado warred with common sense, where the desire to seem worldly fought against genuine inexperience. "My friends did not believe me when I told them," Thomas said. "They said I was making it up about Uncle Landon sheltering an orc woman." "Your friends should mind their own business," Landon replied. "As should you." "I am just visiting family," Thomas protested. "Is that a crime now? It is when you clearly have ulterior motives." But there was no real anger in Landon's voice, just the exasperation of someone dealing with a well-meaning but persistent relative. "Come inside, then. We were about to have lunch." They ate together, and Thomas bombarded Kerra with questions about orc culture, most of them naive but asked with genuine interest rather than hostility. She found herself answering despite her initial wariness, describing the way her clan had organized their village, the stories they told their children, the skills that made up daily life in an orc community. "It does not sound that different from human villages," Thomas said thoughtfully, working through his second bowl of stew. "It is not," Kerra replied. "We are not so different, humans and orcs. We just look different, and that seems to be enough for most of your kind to hate us." Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Not everyone hates orcs. No, but enough do that we cannot live safely in human lands. Enough that your uncle had to stop a mob from branding me for crimes I did not commit." "Is that how Uncle Landon burned his hand?" Thomas looked at his uncle with new respect. "He said it was an accident." "It was an accident that I put myself in a position to require intervention," Landon said dryly. "Let us leave it at that." After lunch, Thomas lingered for another hour, helping stack the split firewood and talking with the easy friendliness of someone who had not yet learned to hate. When he finally rode away, promising to tell his father that Landon was fine and absolutely did not need checking on every week, Kerra found herself smiling. "Your nephew is a good kid," she told Landon as they watched horse and rider disappear down the trail. He is young and foolish and too curious for his own good, Landon replied. But yes, he has a good heart. His father is the same way beneath all the worry and bluster. Will he cause trouble? Your brother, I mean, about me being here. Landon was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Lawrence will have opinions, but he will respect my choices. He knows I can handle myself. Even when those choices involve sheltering the enemy, you are not the enemy. Landon turned to face her fully, and his gray eyes were serious. You never were. The sooner more humans figure that out, the better off we will all be. Kerra felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. She looked away, suddenly unable to hold his gaze, afraid of what he might see in her face. We should finish with that firewood, she said, her voice rougher than intended. Winter waits for no one. If Landon noticed her discomfort, he did not comment on it. They returned to work, but Kerra's mind kept circling back to his words, to the certainty with which he had declared her not an enemy, to the way he looked at her like she was simply Kerra, not an orc or a threat or a problem to be solved. It was becoming harder to remember that this was temporary, that she would leave when winter came, that getting attached was a mistake she could not afford to make. The first frost came on a clear night 2 weeks later, painting the world in white crystals that melted as soon as the sun rose. Landon declared the garden officially done for the year, and turned his attention to hunting, bringing down an elk that would provide meat for weeks if they preserved it properly. They spent 3 days cutting and smoking the meat, working long hours to finish before the flesh could spoil. On the 4th evening, as they sat exhausted by the fire, Landon asked the question Kerra had been dreading. What will you do when winter comes? Where will you go? She had been avoiding thinking about it, pushing the question away each time it surfaced. But now, faced with Landon's direct inquiry, she could not avoid it any longer. I do not know, she admitted. South, probably. Maybe I can make it to the coast before the worst of the weather hits. There are supposed to be port cities that care less about what you are and more about whether you can work. That is a long journey to make alone in winter. Dangerous, too. Staying is more dangerous. You said it yourself, your brother has opinions about me being here. What happens when those opinions turn into something more active? What happens when the wrong person sees me coming or going from your cabin and decides to make an issue of it? I can handle trouble. You cannot stop an entire village, Landon. You barely stopped them last time, and that was surprise and shock working in your favor. Next time, they will be ready. Next time, people might get hurt. She looked at him across the fire. I will not be responsible for that. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. What if you did not leave? What if you stayed through winter? Kerra's heart stuttered. Here, with you, the cabin is warm and well supplied. There is enough food for 2 if we are careful. You could wait out the worst of the weather and leave in spring when travel is safer. He finally met her eyes. If you wanted to. Why would you offer that? You barely know me. I know enough. He shifted, seeming uncomfortable with the conversation but determined to see it through. I know you work hard and keep your word. I know you are skilled at a dozen things that make life easier. I know that having you here has been. He trailed off, searching for words. It has been good, having company again, having someone to talk to. Landon, you do not have to decide now, he interrupted. Just think about it. That is all I ask. Kerra nodded slowly, her mind spinning. She had expected to leave, had been preparing herself emotionally for solitary travel and uncertain futures. The offer to stay changed everything, offered possibilities she had not let herself consider. She lay awake that night long after Landon's breathing had deepened into sleep, staring at the ceiling beams and trying to sort through the tangle of her thoughts. Staying meant risk for both of them. It meant greater chance of discovery, greater consequences if the wrong people learned about the arrangement. But it also meant safety, warmth, food, and perhaps most dangerously of all, companionship. She thought about Landon catching the branding iron, about his burned palm and the scars it would carry forever. He had marked himself for her without hesitation, had stood against a mob for a stranger because it was right. What kind of man did that? What kind of human cared that much about an orc woman's fate? And why did the thought of leaving him make her chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with physical pain? Sleep finally claimed her in the small hours of morning, and she woke to find Landon already gone. A note on the table saying he was checking traps and would return by afternoon. Kerra spent the day working on small tasks around the cabin, her hands busy while her mind wrestled with the decision before her. When Landon returned with 3 rabbits for dinner, she was ready. "I will stay," she said as he cleaned his catch outside. "Through winter, if the offer still stands." He looked up and something in his expression shifted, became lighter somehow. "It stands, thank you. I should be thanking you. Then we are both grateful. That works." They prepared dinner together in companionable silence, and that night they played 3 rounds of the strategy game with carved pieces, and Kerra won 2 of them, which made Landon shake his head in mock disgust. "You are getting too good at this," he complained. "Maybe you are just getting predictable." "Predictable? I will show you predictable." He reset the board and proceeded to lose a 4th game even faster than the 3rd, which made Kerra laugh until her sides hurt. Landon's lips quirked in that almost smile she had learned to recognize, and she realized with sudden clarity that she had not been this happy in years, possibly ever. It was a dangerous realization, and one she did not know what to do with. Winter arrived in earnest a week later, snow falling thick and heavy for 3 days straight until the world outside the cabin was transformed into white silence. They stayed inside, keeping the fire high and working on indoor projects. Landon carved new bowls to replace ones that had cracked. Kerra sewed warm clothes from fabric he had stored away. They read to each other from his books, taking turns with the voices, and Kerra discovered she loved the sound of Landon's voice reading poetry, the way he shaped the words with unexpected gentleness. Sometimes their hands would brush when passing tools or books, and each time it happened, Kerra felt an electric jolt that had nothing to do with cold air and everything to do with the growing awareness between them. She caught Landon watching her sometimes when he thought she was focused on her work, his gray eyes thoughtful and warm in the firelight. She did not know when exactly things shifted from companionship to something more, could not point to a specific moment when her feelings changed. Perhaps it was gradual, built from 1,000 small kindnesses and shared moments. Perhaps it had been there from the beginning, sparked into life the moment he caught that iron and looked at her like she mattered. Whatever the cause, by midwinter Kerra could no longer pretend to herself that what she felt was simple gratitude or friendly affection. She was falling for Landon Quinn, for his quiet strength and his dry humor, and the way he treated her like an equal rather than a curiosity. She was falling for the man who lived alone on a mountain because he valued peace over noise and justice over conformity, and she had no idea what to do about it. The revelation came to a head on a night when the wind howled around the cabin and the fire burned low. They sat together on the floor near the hearth, sharing a blanket against the cold that seeped through even the stout walls. Landon was carving something small and intricate, and Kerra was mending one of his shirts that had torn during firewood gathering. "Can I ask you something?" Landon said suddenly, not looking up from his work. "Of course. Why did you leave your clan's territory after the raid? Why not stay and try to find the others who survived?" Kerra's hand stilled on the fabric. It was a question she had asked herself many times, and the answer was complicated and painful. "I looked," she said quietly. "For weeks, I searched the mountains trying to find where they had gone. But the raid scattered us so completely, and winter was coming, and I realized that even if I found them, I would just be another mouth to feed. Another burden on people who were barely surviving themselves. You think they would have seen you as a burden? I know they would have. I am not a great hunter or warrior. My skills are gentler. Herb craft, cooking, sewing, teaching children. Useful in a settled village, less so when everyone is fleeing for their lives and fighting just to eat." Landon finally looked up. "Those skills are not lesser, Kerra. A community needs more than hunters and warriors. Maybe, but a scattered, desperate people need to survive first before they can worry about community." She went back to her mending, needle flashing in firelight. "So I went south, looking for a place where I could use my skills, where I might be able to earn enough to survive. It was foolish, I know. Orc women have no place in human lands. You have a place here." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them seemed ready to name. Kerra felt her heart beat faster, felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "Landon, I am just saying," he interrupted, his voice careful, "that you fit here. With me, in this life, and if you wanted to stay beyond winter, beyond spring, you could, permanently." Kerra stared at him. "You are asking me to live here, to make this my home. I am asking you to consider it." He set down his carving and turned to face her fully. "I know it is not much, just a cabin on a mountain with a solitary man who is not good at expressing himself. But it is yours if you want it. You are yours if you want it. You mean that. I do not say things I do not mean." Kerra's hands trembled slightly as she set aside the mending. She looked at Landon's face, at the vulnerability in his gray eyes, at the way he held himself carefully still as if afraid sudden movement might break whatever fragile thing had formed between them. "What are you really asking me, Landon?" He took a breath, seeming to gather his courage. "I am asking if you feel the same way I do, if the past months have meant the same to you that they have meant to me, if the thought of you leaving in spring makes you ache the way it makes me ache. And how does it make you ache? Like losing something precious. Like watching my future walk away before I had the courage to ask it to stay." Kerra felt tears prick her eyes, emotions too large and too complicated to name, all clamoring for attention at once. Fear and hope and longing and disbelief, all tangled together until she could barely breathe around them. "I am Orc," she said finally, desperately. "You are human. We are not meant to be together. Your people hate mine. My people distrust yours. How could this possibly work? I do not care what we are supposed to be." Landon's voice was fierce now, passionate in a way she had never heard from him. "I care about what we are, right now, in this moment. I care about the way you laugh when you beat me at strategy games. I care about how you tend my hand with such gentleness even when you are exhausted. I care about coming home from hunting and knowing you will be here, that we will share a meal and talk, and simply exist together in a way that makes everything else bearable. You barely know me. I have spent months learning you, Kerra. Every day, every conversation, every shared task has taught me something new. I know the way you hum when you cook. I know you have nightmares sometimes and wake up trying not to make sound. I know you are brave and skilled and far kinder than the world deserves." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "I know that I have not felt this way about anyone in years, possibly ever, and I am terrified of losing it before I even have the chance to name it properly." Kerra looked down at their joined hands, green skin and pale skin, marked by scars and work and life. They should not fit together. Everything she had been taught said they should not fit together. But they did perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle that had been searching for each other across all the broken spaces of the world. "I am afraid," she whispered, "of what this means, of what could happen." "So am I." Landon squeezed her hand gently, "but I am more afraid of never trying. Of letting fear rob me of something real and good." She met his eyes then, and in them, she saw everything he was offering, not just a home or safety or partnership, but something deeper and more precious. He was offering his heart, scarred and guarded as it was, with all the trust and vulnerability that required, and Kerra realized she wanted to offer hers in return. "I feel it too," she said, her voice shaking. "The ache when I think about leaving, the way I look for you when you are gone too long. The way everything feels lighter when you are near." She turned their joined hands over, studying them. "I tried not to feel it, tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or anything else that was not this. But it is this. It has been this for weeks now, and I do not know what to do with it." "Then let me show you." Landon shifted closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek with the gentleness she had learned to expect from him. "Let me court you properly, the way you deserve. Let us see where this leads without fear or doubt holding us back. Your family will adjust or they will not. It is not their choice to make. The villages nearby can mind their own business or deal with me. Landon, I am serious. There will be consequences for you if people learn about this. Social ones, possibly violent ones. I cannot ask you to accept that risk. You are not asking. I am choosing." His thumb stroked across her cheekbone, tracing the line of green skin with wonder. "I chose when I caught that iron. I chose when I brought you here. I am choosing now, Kerra, with full knowledge of what it might cost. You are worth it. This is worth it." She could not find words sufficient to answer that, so instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was tentative at first, uncertain and exploratory, lips learning each other with the same careful attention they had brought to every other aspect of their relationship. But then Landon's hand slid into her hair, and Kerra's arms wrapped around his shoulders, and the kiss deepened into something fierce and claiming. All the unnamed want of the past months pouring out in a single shared breath. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Landon rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said again, but this time it was not a question or a request. It was a plea. "Stay with me, build a life here, let me love you the way you deserve." "Yes," Kerra breathed. "Yes to all of it." They held each other by the fire as the wind continued to rage outside, and Kerra felt something settle in her chest, some restless, aching thing finally finding peace. She had been running for so long, fleeing from loss and pain and fear. It felt impossible that she had found sanctuary in the arms of a human man on a mountain, that the thing she had been seeking was not a place but a person. But impossible or not, it was real. Landon was real, solid, and warm against her, his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. This feeling was real, this connection that had grown from desperation into something neither of them could have predicted. They talked into the small hours of the morning, making plans and promises, discussing how they would handle the inevitable complications. Landon was confident his brother would come around with time, and that Thomas would be an ally in winning over the family. As for the villages, they would simply have to be careful. Kerra would stay close to the cabin when Landon needed to go for supplies, and they would maintain the fiction that she was temporary help if anyone asked. It was not a perfect solution, but few solutions in complicated situations ever were. When exhaustion finally claimed them both, they fell asleep together by the fire, tangled in blankets and each other, and Kerra had no nightmares. The rest of winter passed in a blur of contentment and quiet joy. Landon courted Kerra with the same thoughtful deliberation he brought to everything else, carving her gifts and teaching her to read the mountain weather and sharing stories about his life before the cabin. Kerra cooked him elaborate meals and sang him orc songs, and slowly taught him words in her language so that he could greet her in her tongue each morning. They grew comfortable with each other in new ways, casual touches and stolen kisses, hands finding each other during evening conversations, falling asleep together, and waking tangled in each other's warmth. The cabin that had been built for one person's solitude became a shared home, and neither of them questioned that this was permanent, that they were building something meant to last. Thomas visited twice more during the winter, and each time he seemed less surprised by Kerra's presence and more accepting of the relationship growing between his uncle and the orc woman. He was young enough that the prejudices of older generations had not fully calcified in him, and smart enough to see that Landon was happier than he had been in years. Lawrence came once, at the very end of winter when the snow had begun to melt, but the roads were still treacherous. He arrived unannounced, riding up to the cabin with the determined expression of a man intent on having a difficult conversation. Kerra saw him coming and felt her stomach drop. This was the confrontation she had been dreading, the moment when Landon's family would demand explanations and make judgments and possibly issue ultimatums. She moved toward the cabin door, intending to disappear inside and give them privacy, but Landon caught her hand. "Stay," he said quietly. "Whatever he has to say, we face it together." So she stood beside him as Lawrence dismounted and approached, and she lifted her chin in defiance even as her heart hammered with anxiety. Lawrence was older than Landon by perhaps 5 years, broader through the middle and starting to gray at the temples. He had the same gray eyes, but where Landon's held quiet reserve, Lawrence's held open worry and determination. He looked between them, taking in their joined hands and the way they stood shoulder to shoulder, and his expression shifted through several emotions too quick to name. "So it is true," he said finally. "Thomas said you were courting an orc, but I did not want to believe it." "Then you wasted a trip." Landon's voice was level but carried an edge of steel. "I will not apologize for my choices, Lawrence, and I will not tolerate lectures about them." "I am not here to lecture." Lawrence sighed and rubbed his face. "Well, I am a little, but mostly I am here because you are my brother and I need to understand what you are doing. I am building a life with someone I care about. That is what I am doing. With an orc, Landon. Do you understand what that means? The danger you are putting yourself in. The social consequences. I understand perfectly." Landon's grip on Kerra's hand tightened fractionally. "And I do not care. Kerra is staying. We are together. That is not up for debate or negotiation." Lawrence looked at Kerra directly for the first time, really studied her, and she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. She saw him take in her work roughened hands, her practical clothes, the way she stood close to Landon with easy familiarity born of months together. "Thomas says you are good to him," Lawrence said to her, "that you make him happy." Kerra blinked, surprised. "I try to be. He has given me everything: safety, home, purpose. I would never do anything to hurt him. And if a mob comes here, if the wrong people learn about this arrangement, then we will deal with it together," Kerra replied steadily. "I am not weak, Lawrence Quinn, and neither is your brother. We know the risks and we are choosing each other anyway." Something in Lawrence's expression softened slightly. He turned back to Landon. "You are sure about this?" "Really sure. Because once the village learns, and they will learn eventually, there will be no taking it back. I have never been more sure of anything." Landon pulled Kerra closer to his side. "She is my future, Lawrence. I need you to accept that, or at least respect it enough not to interfere." The brothers stared at each other for a long moment, some wordless communication passing between them. Finally, Lawrence nodded. All right, all right. If this is what you want, I will not stand in your way. He paused, then added quietly, but I do not have to like the danger it puts you in. Fair enough. Lawrence stayed for lunch, and the tension slowly eased as the three of them talked. He asked Kerra questions about her skills and her past, and she answered honestly, leaving nothing out about the raid or her months of wandering. By the time he prepared to leave, Lawrence had thawed considerably, though he still looked worried. Take care of him, he told Kerra at the door. He is stubborn and too brave for his own good, but he is my brother and I love him. I will guard him with my life, Kerra promised. You have my word on that. Lawrence nodded and embraced Landon roughly, murmuring something Kerra could not hear. Then he mounted and rode away, and Kerra let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. That went better than expected, she said. Lawrence is a good man beneath the worry. He just needed to see that I know what I am doing. Landon turned and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. 1 hurdle cleared, only 100 more to go. 100 might be conservative. Probably, but I have always been an optimist. Kerra laughed against his shoulder, feeling the tension of the past hour drain away. They would face whatever came together, and somehow that made even the impossible seem manageable. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in patches to reveal brown earth eager for warmth. Landon and Kerra prepared the garden for planting, and she helped him repair winter damage to the shed and the cabin's exterior. They fell into new rhythms as the seasons changed, and Kerra realized she no longer thought about leaving, no longer planned for a future that did not include this mountain and this man. One evening in late spring, as they sat outside watching the sun set over the valley below, Landon pulled something from his pocket and held it out to her. It was a ring, simple but beautiful, carved from dark wood and inlaid with green stone that matched her skin. I made it from an oak that fell last winter, he said, his voice carefully neutral in the way it got when he was trying not to show emotion. The stone is jade I had saved from my army days. I was going to sell it eventually, but this seemed like a better use. Kerra stared at the ring, her heart climbing into her throat. Landon, marry me. He took her hand, cradling it gently. I know it will not be official, not in any human court or church. I know we cannot walk into a village and have a ceremony with witnesses. But we can marry here, in the way that matters. We can pledge ourselves to each other before the mountain and the sky and make promises that mean everything even if they are not written in any human record. You want to marry me. Actually marry me. I want to spend my life with you. I want to wake up beside you for the next 40 years and grow old together and build something that lasts. If that is marriage, then yes, I want to marry you. His gray eyes were fierce and tender at once. Say yes, Kerra. Please say yes. She could not speak through the tears, so she nodded frantically and held out her hand so he could slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if carved specifically for her, which of course it had been. Landon had planned this, had spent hours crafting something beautiful just for her, had thought about their future and decided he wanted to claim it formally. Yes, she finally managed to choke out. Yes, I will marry you. I will spend my life with you. I will build a future here and grow old beside you and never stop being grateful that you caught that iron. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and when they broke apart, they were both laughing and crying at once. They married themselves a week later, on a clear spring morning with the whole mountain as their witness. They spoke vows to each other in both human and orc tongues, promising loyalty and love and partnership through whatever challenges came. Landon produced a second ring he had carved for himself, and Kerra slipped it onto his finger with shaking hands. It was simple and private and perfect, and when they kissed to seal the promises, Kerra felt something fundamental shift inside her. She was no longer lost or wandering. She belonged here, with this man, in this life they were building together. That evening, Lawrence and Thomas arrived unexpectedly, bringing food and wine and congratulations. Lawrence embraced Kerra and welcomed her to the family officially, and Thomas gave them both carved wooden figures of an orc and a human holding hands, which made Kerra cry all over again. They celebrated into the night, and for the first time since the raid that destroyed her clan, Kerra felt like she had family again. Not the family she was born into, but the family she had chosen and that had chosen her in return. Summer came with warmth and work, and Kerra threw herself into making the cabin and its surroundings truly theirs. She expanded the garden, adding herbs and vegetables she remembered from her clan. She decorated the interior with small touches that made it feel like home rather than just shelter. She and Landon built a small addition onto the back of the cabin, a workshop where she could practice herb craft and he could do his carving. Thomas visited regularly, often bringing news from the valley below. The villages knew by now that Landon had taken in an orc woman, and opinions ranged from scandalous disapproval to cautious acceptance. A few people had made noises about investigating or intervening, but nothing had come of it yet, perhaps because Landon's reputation as a capable and dangerous man preceded him. There was talk in the tavern last week, Thomas reported one afternoon while helping harvest early lettuce. Some of the militia men saying something should be done about the orc on the mountain. Kerra's hands stilled in the dirt. What kind of something? Nothing specific, just tough talk from men with too much ale in them. Thomas glanced at her. Uncle Landon would never let anyone hurt you, you know that, right? And my father and I would not either. You are family now. The simple declaration made Kerra's eyes sting with emotion. Thank you, Thomas. That means more than you know. You make him happy. That is all that matters to those of us who actually care about him. But not everyone cared about Landon's happiness, as they discovered one hot afternoon in midsummer. Kerra was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching, too many of them to be casual visitors. She straightened and saw Landon emerge from the workshop, his expression already hardening as he counted riders. 6 of them, all men, all armed. The militia had come. Get inside, Landon said quietly, moving to place himself between Kerra and the approaching riders. No. She moved to stand beside him instead. We face this together. Remember, he looked like he wanted to argue but did not have time before the riders reached the cabin's clearing. Kerra recognized the captain from the village square, the one who had been ready to brand her all those months ago. He sat his horse with the casual arrogance of a man backed by armed companions, and his eyes swept over the cabin and garden with obvious disapproval. Landon Quinn, he announced formally, you are harboring a known orc criminal in violation of regional statutes regarding non-human residents. I am harboring my wife, Landon replied calmly, which violates no statute I am aware of. The captain's expression flickered with surprise, then hardened. Marriage between human and orc is not recognized legally. The creature with you has no rights under human law. Then it is fortunate we are not standing in a human court. Landon's hand drifted to the axe at his belt. This is my land, Captain, private property. You have no authority here. We have authority to investigate and apprehend criminals. On what charges? You had nothing but assumptions and prejudice last time we met. Has that changed? The captain shifted in his saddle, and Kerra saw him exchange glances with his men. They were less certain than their leader, less eager for confrontation with a man who looked entirely too calm given the odds. We have reports of orc activity in the area, the captain said finally. theft, property damage, attacks on livestock. Your orc woman is the most obvious suspect. Kerra has not left this property in months, Landon said. She has been with me every day working on our homestead. If there is orc activity elsewhere, it has nothing to do with her, so you say. So I swear, under oath if necessary. Landon took a step forward, and despite being on foot against mounted men, he somehow seemed larger, more imposing. Now I will give you the same choice I gave you last time, Captain. You can turn around and leave peacefully, or you can try to take her and discover exactly how unpleasant that experience will be. You threaten lawful authorities. I state facts to trespassers on my land. The tension stretched taut as a wire, violence trembling in the air between the two groups. Kerra's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears, and she prepared to fight alongside Landon even though the odds were terrible. But she would not go meekly, would not let them take her or hurt him without making them pay dearly for it. Then one of the other riders, a younger man Kerra did not recognize, cleared his throat. "Captain, maybe we should let it be. Quinn has not bothered anyone, and his brother is respected in the valley. Starting a fight here could cause more problems than it solves." The captain glared at his subordinate, but seemed to hear the wisdom in the words. He looked back at Landon, calculation visible on his face as he weighed options and consequences. "We will be watching," he said finally. "Any trouble, any hint of orc violence in the area, and we will be back, with more men and legal authority that you cannot simply dismiss." "Then I hope for your sake there is no trouble," Landon replied evenly. "Because I protect what is mine, Captain, by any means necessary." The militia men turned their horses and rode away, and Kerra did not breathe properly until they had disappeared from sight. Only then did she allow herself to sag slightly, exhaustion and fear catching up with her all at once. Landon turned and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "They will be back," Kerra said against his shoulder. "Maybe not this week or next month, but eventually. And next time they will be ready for you. Let them come. We will deal with it." "How? You cannot fight the whole valley, Landon." "No, but I can make it clear that the cost of taking you is higher than anyone wants to pay." He pulled back to look at her face. "I meant what I said out there. I will protect you by any means necessary. They will not take you from me. Even if it means violence, even if it means making enemies of everyone around us, even then." His eyes were fierce. "You are my wife, Kerra, my family, my future. I did not marry you to give you up at the first sign of pressure." She wanted to argue, to make him see reason, to convince him that one orc woman was not worth the cost he was willing to pay. But looking at his face, at the absolute certainty in his expression, she knew it would be pointless. Landon had chosen her, completely and irrevocably, and he would stand by that choice no matter what it cost him. All she could do was choose him back just as fiercely, and hope their combined stubbornness was enough to see them through whatever came next. The confrontation with the militia cast a shadow over the rest of summer, but slowly life returned to normal. The threatened return did not materialize, and the reports of orc activity elsewhere in the valley eventually stopped. Thomas brought news that sentiment in the villages was shifting, that enough people had pointed out the lack of actual evidence against Kerra that the captain's crusade had lost momentum. Lawrence visited more frequently, sometimes bringing his wife, a kind woman named Margaret who treated Kerra with careful courtesy that slowly warmed into genuine friendliness. They had 2 daughters in addition to Thomas, both younger, and the first time they visited, the girls were so curious about Kerra that they overcame their nervousness to pepper her with questions. "Does it hurt to have tusks?" the younger one asked. "Can you really pick up a grown man?" asked the older. Kerra answered their questions patiently, and by the end of the visit, both girls had decided she was fascinating rather than frightening. Margaret pulled her aside before they left and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for being patient with them," she said quietly. "And thank you for making Landon happy. I know this is not easy for any of you, but you are good for him." "He is good for me," Kerra replied, "better than I deserve." "None of us get what we deserve. We just get what we fight for," Margaret smiled. "Keep fighting, Kerra, you are worth it." Autumn arrived with cooler temperatures and the endless work of preparing for another winter. But this year, Kerra worked with the confidence of someone who knew this was her home, who had claim to this place and this life. She and Landon harvested the expanded garden and stacked firewood and sealed cracks in the walls against winter cold. They worked side by side with the easy coordination of partners who knew each other deeply, anticipating needs and movements without needing to speak. One evening in late autumn, as they sat by the fire, Landon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved figure. It was an orc woman and a human man, their hands joined, standing together on a mountain base. "I made this," he said, setting it on the table between them. "For us. To remember where we started and how far we have come." Kerra picked up the carving, studying the careful detail, the way he had captured her tusks and his beard, the way their carved hands intertwined perfectly. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and full of meaning that did not need words. "I love you," she said, looking up at him. "I do not think I have said that properly yet, but I love you, Landon Quinn, with everything I am." His face transformed into a smile so genuine and open that it took her breath away. "I love you too, Kerra Quinn. With everything I have and everything I hope to be." They kissed across the table, knocking over the carving, which rolled onto its side but did not break. Later they would set it on the shelf beside the window where sunlight could catch it each morning, a reminder of promises kept and futures claimed against all odds. Winter arrived for the second time since Kerra had come to the mountain, but this year felt entirely different. This year she was not a refugee or a temporary worker or even just a partner. She was a wife, a member of a family, a woman who had found her place in the world against all expectation. The season passed in comfortable routine, and when spring returned, they planted the garden together and made plans for expanding their homestead. Thomas announced he was courting a girl from the next valley over and asked Kerra's advice on how to woo her properly, which made both her and Landon laugh. Lawrence brought news that the militia captain had retired and moved away, and the new captain had no interest in pursuing vendettas against mountain hermits and their orc wives. Slowly, cautiously, the world began to shift around them. They were not accepted everywhere, not by everyone, but they were tolerated, and sometimes tolerance was enough to build on. One summer afternoon, nearly 2 years after Landon had caught the branding iron, Kerra stood in the garden and looked out over the valley below. She thought about the terrified orc woman who had knelt in the village square expecting to be marked forever, who had lost everything and everyone and saw no future beyond surviving one more day. That woman would not have believed this life was possible, would not have imagined that humans could be kind, or that love could cross the spaces between species and cultures, would not have dared to hope that home was something you could find rather than something you were born into. But Kerra believed it now, with every fiber of her being. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Landon approaching, carrying a basket of berries they had been picking from wild bushes on the mountain slope. His hair was longer now, tied back with a cord she had woven. His beard had threads of gray that had not been there when they met. His hands bore the scars of work and life, including the permanent mark on his palm from the iron he had caught for her sake. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Penny for your thoughts," he asked, setting down the basket. I was thinking about branding irons and mountain men and impossible love stories, she replied, moving into his arms. Those are some heavy thoughts for a summer afternoon. They are good thoughts, grateful thoughts, she kissed him softly. Thank you, Landon, for catching that iron, for standing between me and every bad thing that tried to come, for building this life with me. Thank you for staying, he replied, for choosing me back, for making this cabin a home instead of just a place to hide. They stood together in the garden they had built, on the mountain they had claimed, under a sky that arched over both human and orc lands without discrimination. The world was still hard, still full of prejudice and fear and people who would never understand what they had found together. But here, in this place they had made their own, none of that mattered. Here they were simply Landon and Kerra, husband and wife, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and held on through everything that tried to tear them apart. Here they were home, and that was enough.